The UK Labour Party has been hit by accusations of anti-Semitism in recent months, especially against its leader, Jeremy Corbyn. His fellow Labour MP, Margaret Hodge, who lost members of her family in the Holocaust, said Corbyn was an anti-Semitic racist, while three of the main Jewish newspapers in the UK described him as an existential threat to British Jews. The Labour leader has been accused of sharing platforms with Holocaust deniers and making offensive remarks about British Zionists. His supporters, though, argue that Corbyn is a lifelong anti-racist and that the attacks against him are smears designed to discredit his strong support for Palestinians and prevent criticism of Israel. So, is the Labour leader really guilty of anti-Semitism or even of turning a blind eye to it? Joining me from London to debate this are Michael Rosen, an award-winning novelist and poet and a Jewish Corbyn supporter, and Daniella Peled, a writer and contributor to the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, a former foreign editor of the Jewish Chronicle and a Jewish Corbyn critic. Thank you both for joining me in the arena. Daniella, speaking on Wednesday at his party's annual conference in Liverpool, Jeremy Corbyn said, "We will work with Jewish communities to eradicate anti-Semitism, both from our party and wider society." He says there's a problem. He says he's dealing with it. That doesn't sound like an anti-Semite, does it?
Mr. Corbyn has not won the confidence, the support of the vast majority of British Jews. And although you can find his supporters have cherry-picked Jewish people who are speaking out in support of him, I've never seen such a consensus amongst this very, very diverse community feeling that Labour is no longer a comfortable place for them.
And for our global audience who haven't been following the details of this, how would you sum up, in kind of, if you can sum it up, why the British Jewish community has this consensus that Labour is no longer a comfortable place for them?
Well, look, Mr. Corbyn is part of the traditionally far left of Labour, who have quite a binary view of the world, divided up into nice anti-imperialists like Iran, Russia, Assad and Syria, and the nasty Western imperialists like America, Israel, NATO, the EU as well. And in this very binary reading of foreign affairs, Jews end up as white imperialists. And I think this worldview has now become quite dominant in the party. And that makes Jewish people who are not really that bothered about Israel one way or another, feel that they are being sidelined and being discriminated against. And most importantly, that when they say this is anti-Semitism and they call out instances of prejudice, they're told that this is somehow a smear. Michael
Rosen, it's not all a smear, is it?
Well, I think, first of all, we're going to have to rank back a bit and sort out some definitions here. We talk about the Jewish community as if there is just one community. It's not really, strictly speaking, true. And there are plenty of Jews in the Labour Party. I'm not in the Labour Party, but I support Jeremy Corbyn.
Michael, just to be clear, do you at least recognise, we can argue about the numbers, but a big chunk of the British Jewish community is unhappy with Labour under Corbyn because they perceive it as not a safe space or a comfortable space or a friendly space for British Jews? You concede that is the perception, even if you disagree with the reasoning behind it.
Yes, of course, absolutely. But then, of course, exactly as Daniella says, a large percentage of the Jewish community, if that's what we're going to call it, a large percentage of Jews are in favour of Israel, but not all Jews, some aren't. And I have no attachment to that place over there, but of course I understand that plenty of Jews do. Plenty of Jews are brought up to believe that Israel is their homeland, even if they don't make it their homeland. It is there for them, as they believe, of course. But there are other people living there. This is the crucial point about Israel. There are other people not recognised by the recent nation-state law.
Daniella, how much of this is to do with the Israel-Palestine conflict, with this thorny debate over Zionism, anti-Zionism, when you do have the chief rabbi and the former chief rabbi of the UK both saying that anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism? It does muddy the water when we're trying to work out what is bigotry, what is hatred, what is legitimate political criticism, doesn't it?
Well, I think the real problem here is this accusation that critics of Corbyn, Jewish critics of Corbyn, are criticising him as part of a smear campaign because their real interests are in defending Israel, apparently, or they're all conservative voters who are weaponising anti-Semitism as this political tool. And that feeds straight into all those classic anti-Semitic tropes that I've been exposed to as well, mostly as a reporter writing about Israel-Palestine, that Jews are more loyal to each other and by extension Israel than the countries that they live in and the countries that they're citizens of. Now, this doesn't... Jeremy Corbyn's comments about Zionists not understanding irony are a classic example of this kind of attitude that I've experienced over and over again. And I think that is the most wounding and the most damaging part of this whole thing.
Michael, I just want to drill down into Labour and Jeremy Corbyn. I just want to get your sense of where you stand here. Is your position that Jeremy Corbyn, that he's done nothing wrong and that this is a smear campaign from the right or from supporters of Israel? Or is it your position that perhaps he's used bad language in the past or he's said the wrong thing? Or does he have a blind spot for this stuff, maybe? That's what some have suggested, supporters of his. Where do you stand?
I think the basic mistake, if he has made mistakes, is he hasn't been vocal enough in defying and picking back, if you like, because he's not a linguist. He's a politician, and he thinks that he has an honourable thing to do, which is to support the rights of justice and peace in the Middle East and justice for the Palestinians. And he thinks that has nothing to do directly with discrimination against Jews, or indeed prejudice against Jews in Britain. That's what he thinks. Okay. And by and large, I agree with that.
Daniella.
Michael, it would be interesting to know from you then what would be my motivations as a lifelong Labour voter for saying there is a real problem with anti-Semitism in Labour. Am I part of a smear? Am I in the part of a Conservative smear or being funded by the Israeli embassy? There are plenty of people who stand up for Palestinian rights and say there is a problem. You're tying yourself in knots to try and justify what's not justifiable. When Boris Johnson made his really rather unpleasant comments about Muslim women looking letterboxes, people dealt with those comments as they were on their merits, or rather their lack of merits. No one was saying this is part of a left-wing conspiracy trying to derail a potential government led by Boris Johnson. Let's look at what he has said and judge it on its merits, and those merits are very lacking.
Well, as it happens, Daniella, I haven't said it's a right-wing conspiracy or anybody's conspiracy sitting here. If some people do, well, you know, they've worked out that maybe there are some relationships between Jews in Britain and Israel and Israelis. I'm not saying that, though what I would say is that the media in this country was very reluctant to point out that
there's
some
no
of the
allegations
chief
of
people
smear
who were most vocal, were most vocal about it, had very important positions and recognised positions in the Conservative Party, all right? And so had those links. And indeed, the ex-chief rabbi was a very fond of Margaret Thatcher. So it's not as if the only agenda these people had in attacking Corbyn was simply
So the chief rabbi is making accusations of anti-Semitism because he's a Tory?
Well, all I'm saying is that just to not investigate other reasons why people might want to attack a Labour leader is quite important. You remember the last Labour leader we had was attacked for having a father who was a Jewish traitor by a Tory newspaper, the Daily Mail.
Ed Miliband, who was the first Jewish leader of the Labour Party, didn't win a majority of Jewish support in 2015, and a lot of the anti-Semitism cases at a local level did turn up on his leadership, on his watch. So it is. Some would say it is unfair to put this all at Corbyn's door, the bad relationship between the Labour Party and British Jewish communities. Would you concede that?
I think, as I said, I think it's symptomatic of a wider issue, the fact that his leadership has emboldened a section of the far left that has always held these really rather extreme views towards British Jews as being wealthy, as being part of the ruling class, as being capitalists and as being imperialists. And Corbyn has not taken significant action. He hasn't spoken out and he hasn't apologised or made consultations in any kind of
Daniella, he has apologised several times.
And believe me, I'm not speaking
He has apologised several times, though, hasn't he, for making mistakes, for not dealing with this soon enough, and he's now come out this week in the conference and said, we want to eradicate anti-Semitism, we won't tolerate this in the party?
He is
and
clearly...
repeatedly,
like
in the House of Commons, supported Jews. Over 20 years, he's supported early day motions, as we call them in the House of Commons here, supported Jews 10 times over the last 25 years. So, you know, he's no...
All you're doing, Michael, is you're telling me there isn't a problem. If you were the Viktor Orban,
I will say to you that, of course, there is a problem, as there is in the whole of society. I'm repeating, if you like, exactly what John Landsman, the leader of one of the supporting groups, but there are plenty of Jews in the Labour Party. I came from a left-wing Jewish tradition that thought that one of the ways we could deal with our problems in
Michael,
the world was to find universal values.
Michael,
and one of the ways was to join Labour and socialist parties.
Michael, just on the issue of the problem, Daniella
saying you're
Daniella is saying that you're denying the problem, and you're saying there's a problem in Labour as there is with the rest of society. Corbyn himself said in a statement recently, anyone who denies that this has surfaced in our party is clearly actually wrong and contributing to the problem. It's not enough to just say, well, everyone's got an anti-Semitism problem and therefore do a bit of whataboutism, is it?
I agree, because obviously the Labour Party is founded on universalistic ideas of human rights. It claims to be an anti-racist party. So, of course, Jeremy Corbyn will say, well, we do have a problem if we have any anti-Semites in the Labour Party. There may be anti-Semites out there in society, but it's our job to root it out of the Labour Party. Indeed.
So let me ask you this, Daniella, before we finish. What is the solution moving forward for this fraught relationship between British Jews and the Labour Party under Corbyn? Is there a solution, or is it too late?
I'm afraid I can't see one right now. I think that there's been a lack of effort to show goodwill, a lack of communication, and I think this extends to a wide range of issues. I have personally more problems with the Labour Party's view on Syria, or on Ukraine and other foreign affairs issues than I do on Israel-Palestine. But I think the gap is just too large, and trust has been eroded, perhaps for a long time to come.
Michael, trust has been eroded. How does Jeremy Corbyn get it back, or can he not get it back?
I don't know. I'm no great crystal ball gazer, but the interesting thing here is the question to ask is, are those people who are opposed to Jeremy Corbyn over this matter, are they interested in eradicating anti-Semitism, or are they interested in eradicating Jeremy Corbyn? That's what the plotting all this summer and before has been about. Let's get rid of Corbyn.
Michael Rosen, Daniella Peled, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me in the arena. That's our show. Up Front will be back next week.